Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Shadowverse. So, we were trying to wrap up playing Shadowverse. I haven't actually played Shadowverse in nearly a month, other than doing the solo mode, and a new update is here. And if I was still playing Shadowverse, the idea of this crosscraft might be fairly exciting, but I can't help but feel like, from the outside looking in, that it is too little too late. Shadowverse is like 6-7 years old, at least. So the idea of doing a red-blue deck, to use Magic the Gathering concepts, if that was something that was introduced 7 years after Magic the Gathering had started, it would be too big of a change, and it wouldn't be enough of a change to bring in any new players. And you have to, on the underlying, realize that Shadowcraft, up until this point, has very carefully, or at least they've made the claim implicitly, that Havencraft cards had to be Havencraft cards. They couldn't just be generic cards, because that would cause some game balance breaking scenario. So effectively, they're saying they don't care about game balance anymore, which is probably true. Like, they're probably just so desperate to maintain the number of players and possibly try and gain new players that they'll throw anything at the walls to make changes, to make improvements. Arguably, this was also a complaint about Hearthstone in the later days, is that Hearthstone started just making too many changes, and it felt like they were just trying to add content, particularly when they added the auto chess element to Hearthstone, which I mean, there was definitely people just playing the auto chess element of Hearthstone as a completely separate thing, not too different from the solo visual novel element in Shadowverse. But yeah, there's really no way that Crosscraft here can possibly claim to be balanced, unless yeah, there's just no way. So what I assume is going to happen with this new feature, and I definitely was not expecting to run into new features. Of course, that danger is here. I could finish the main storyline stuff, and then they would throw in yet another solo storyline element. And I will say right now, if they do throw in another chapter for solo mode, I'm not going to do that. Like, you have to draw the line. Where I wanted to end it is a great place to end it. So they have this whole thing, which seems like it's only going to be even around for a brief time. So that this might be a bit of an experiment. But they are putting it right here with your ranked plays and your solo plays. So once where there was nothing, you now have this crosscraft. And you can also play unranked. I'd almost assume that you may not be able to make a crosscraft regular game. Nope, you can. I would almost have to assume that there is some combination of cards that already would completely break Crosscraft in some insane way. And with this update, we also have an exclamation point on the solo. So, yeah. I didn't even know that a new solo story had happened. Which means I'm going to have to try and play all of this and move in this story. And see, what's funny is this is probably a bit of spoiler, but it seems like this story is still in line with this main story, and it may just be a case that these chapters just keep on going. So I said I wanted to end on 14 here, but I may frankly not have a choice. I may have to just struggle through doing the challenges. The problem is you really would have to do the challenges, and there's almost certainly going to be a battle that's going to be incredibly difficult. Also, I bet there isn't a complete story here either, because Shadowverse has been particularly bad about that. We can find that out fairly quickly. Empyrean ends, new story and new character. No talk of how many chapters. Every other time they've added a story, though, they have just done the first 4 or 5 chapters of 12 chapters. And them introducing a new character, I don't think means that there's a new kind of deck. If anything, there's probably yeah, you still are between Forestcraft and Swordcraft, or Runecraft, or Dragoncraft, or Portalcraft, or Havencraft, Bloodcraft, or Shadowcraft. And you can see how I've changed the skins on almost all the original characters. The only original character here we have is Eris, which her story I really got dropped as much as any of the other characters do. So there isn't going to be a whole new style of cards. It would be far too late to do that. Anyways, we were, I think, at Entropy's Abyss. Let's go through the story. Let's what I'll have to do is, after this recording, I'll have to check this new story and see if it's a complete story. If it's not a complete story, we'll just leave it at that. We'll probably want to leave it at that anyways. Leave it on chapter 14. Leave it on a cliffhanger. It's always going to end on a cliffhanger no matter what. This is not too different from like the hard decision of giving up on a TV series, because a lot of the long-running, we're never going to end this TV series, will just keep dragging the viewers along forever, and you have to just make that hard choice to say, I'm done, I'm out, I'm not going to watch anymore. But the Lord sleeps, and his realm is ripe. As much as people hate it when their favorite show gets canceled, it at least forces several other people to stop wasting their time. But not everybody, because there's definitely a case in TV shows where if you get to syndication, which used to be 100 episodes, but now you probably could get something syndicated with about 60 episodes. Once something is in syndication, it just gets rerun over and over again, and there are those people that just go back to that over and over again and watch the same episodes in cycles, and that is their self-soothing exercise, and it feels familiar. And I can't completely disagree with that. If you love Seinfeld, for instance, and you wanted to watch Seinfeld over and again, that's not a terrible thought. But or The Office is kind of a great example. Lots of people go back and watch The Office over and over again. Personally, I don't do too much of that. There's a couple of movies that I may watch every year, or maybe every couple of years. But for the most part, I would rather just roll the dice on something new on Netflix or something. And even watching something on Netflix, there is a high chance it will be canceled after a season. So you're not making a long commitment.
Mortals cannot overthrow a god.
Of course, I have no care about what's actually being said here, and so I'm just
and an
talking
utter
over this.
disappointment. How you managed to
This
make it
is
here,
just
I sure don't
repeated
know.
again.
I was hoping for someone worthy. Indeed, I was hoping for my next vessel.
What's funny is this is
So this is the Lord of Darkness.
Orisa,
Lord? No,
and then we've got other voices.
I am a god.
Orisa
And you all are sheep in my fold.
with
Now, I will
Ilencrest,
keep
so I
you
assume
as long
that
as there's any profit in it.
at some point the narrator's voice
The moment
doesn't
you lose your value to
equate
me, you
to
shall
an
be led to the
actual
slaughter.
character. And then this intro
They stretch forth their hands, but cannot
kind
grasp
of jumped
victory,
and showed the
They
male
strive
voice
with
of the
all their
vampire guy, I
strength.
think.
but cannot defy fate.
I
Claws
wouldn't
and
be
fangs
surprised if it
break
turns
and
out that
shatter
this voiceover
before fading into darkness.
is the
The ending
fortune
of our
teller.
Lewis tale is as
It'd
of
make
yet
more sense
unwritten.
for her to have been the voiceover for all things, all the chapters, even going back to the prologue.
The ones who'll take down the Lord of Darkness and seize the throne will be us.
So-
the werewolves.
I assume this
You
guy
really think dogs can rule? Velsar belongs
is
to
a
us.
peace-loving
Each and every one
character
of you is nothing but prey for the dragon
that
boots.
is going to be forced to fight, because it would kind of be odd if it went the opposite way, where he's a fighter
The
and
darkness of night is only the beginning.
and
Rivers
became
of
peace-loving.
The scent of iron
Because
in the air.
Maybe
Velsar,
you'd have to
its history is
justify
one
a
of
love
endless
for
war,
peace that causes him
an
to fight the
ocean of
final bad
tears,
guy.
and landfills of decapitated heads. A world where justice and ideals extinguish.
You never really get explained who the
How
winged
beautiful.
monsters are on the right there.
Bones seized and
So,
broken.
like, they don't look like dragon
Bodies
newts.
mutilated, fur stripped.
I wonder if they're supposed to be the yokai, but I would say those are the yokai.
Sliced and
That would make
shattered.
a lot more sense.
Each claims justice, but tyranny reigns supreme. Truly a delight. Truly a thrill. The true essence of life, don't you think?
I do not
Of course, the problem here
Truly lack elegance,
is that
like a blade disdained of death, unknowing the beauty of battle.
it'd be very easy for them to just
Daggerel, truly a fitting
go
name.
back
You
to
are not but a mirage,
making
devoid of
a
feeling, of passion.
council of the monsters all working together to defeat the
You are the dark side
Lord.
of the moon, the beauty and mystery.
Your
This world
words
only
are
makes
yet
sense
cruel,
if there's no
the
idea
reason
of
why you're
sharing
weak.
power. If
So
that
your will
concept
has not
is just
changed.
unacceptable
decide
or
who
have
is
never been thought
correct.
about at
We
all.
must commit.
Um,
A sword never unsheathed is but a stick.
but yeah,
A drawn
we've
sword is
already
but
seen in
cold
previous
steel,
chapters people
neither
making
good
guilds and
nor evil.
sharing power.
Your presence isn't needed here.
And
Vanish.
that is kind of the
Your
problem with
defeat is fate.
these stories anyways, is
For your
that it is
duty
the
forgotten.
same
The path you
concepts.
walk gone astray.
Thus, you must fall.
There is an argument that there's a saying that only 7 stories truly exist anyways, and it's just the way you tell it and the window dressing around that. But even if you were going to believe that, still people have done that. Oh, and no voice acting here. We may have to actually read some things out
How
loud.
strange. I feel lightheaded. Moreover,
But yeah,
for what
if they were
reason am
going
I
to
surrounded?
tell one of the 7 archetypes of stories,
You disgust me. Give yourself up and accept
They should have
your
picked
punishment.
one story and
Murder.
instead of jumping between 3 or 4 stories. The man pours through his memories, searching for an answer. His attire is that of a swordsman, and the blade rests by his side. Perhaps there's some plausibility to the yokai's claim. I guess maybe both of them are yokais. They call him Karasu Tingu.
You're the only one around here
Mm,
with the blade capable
he
of
is
these acts.
Oni,
You're as
which
good
is
as
Japanese
guilty.
for demon.
There's no question.
I killed?
He focuses sensation on his hands, hoping his body remembers what his mind does not.
My apologies. I cannot remember.
What? You can't remember?
Is that your plan? To feign innocence?
Swordsman's eyes, bordered by long eyelashes,
No,
sorrowful clothes.
I truly cannot remember. Not a single thing.
So either
I
this
seem
is a
to have
case where
memories. Therefore,
there's
I
2
remember
different
nothing.
people or 2 different
The hell?
personalities.
Is this some sick game for you?
The club rises, pointing first towards heaven before being speedily brought down towards the man. The club delivers a blow of monstrous strength, one strong enough to shatter boulders or gorge the earth. A powerful and utterly brutal strike.
That jog your memory well enough? Better luck in your next life, you monster.
I feel like the creature's beak freezes in motion in disbelief of what it sees.
It can't be. What the hell?
I thank you for your kindness. However, it appears that blow did not clear the fog in my head.
You should be pulverized. How the hell are you not dead? What kind of monster are we up against?
So
Mercy
yeah,
tempered your last blow.
this character,
You may try again with all your strength.
With pleasure. It's your funeral, punk. Get him, boys!
yeah, this guy's probably not going to talk very much, so we're going to get a lot of description, so I'm going to have to actually read things out, or just not read things out. Yokai crawl out from the shadows. They encircle a solitary target, unleashing a vortex of devastating attacks. Only gruesome fate awaits their victims. Or so they would expect.
I can't. Go on.
One assailant drops out, in a second, the violent vortex soon subsides like a summer breeze. Dejected words of defeat can be heard above the din, but they come not from the attack, but from the attackers themselves. After dozens upon dozens fruitlessly strike, their bodies are exhausted and their spirits spent.
Just what the hell are you?
One by one, the yokai lower the weapons, shuddering and muttering as they pull back. The target lightly shakes his head, unscathed save for a single rivulet of blood.
The fog in my head is cleared to some degree. To answer your question,
You truly lack elegance, like a blade disdain of death, unknowing the beauty of battle. Kagero, truly a fitting name. You are not but a mirage, devoid of feeling, of passion.
So you could be peaceful in the
My
sense that
name
he
is
could just
likely
be a giant
Kagero.
shield.
Kagero, you say? Strange name. What
And so he
kind of
could go
infuriating
down
trick did you
a
use?
kind of
We practically hit you a
peaceful
dozen times over.
path
a fair
of
point.
just letting people hit
However,
him.
It is truth that I am still standing. If hits and
Which
blows
is
cannot
not
calm your
too
fury,
different from
perhaps a walk might do.
the
My apologies for any inconvenience caused.
Titan character that took over
What the
Arissa's
hell are you
body,
talking about?
Ilmongo,
You think
or
this is
whatever his
something you can
name
just walk away
was.
Please, let me through.
Looks like you're not getting it. No one's letting you off the hook, murderer.
If pleads of
What's
mercy
annoying,
worked,
though, is
Velsar
that
wouldn't be a bloodbath. You
they
think you
introduced
put
the
up a fight, you
Titans,
shut up and die.
and then really only one of the Titans was
Tough, but you don't
was
impress us.
important,
How about
and the
we
other
tie
2
him up
Titans
and
got
sink him into
forgotten
the
about.
depths?
A pity.
So what was the point of, with an expression of anguish and a sigh of deepest sorrow imaginable, he draws his sword. The blade shines and glistens as if brimming with tears. I wonder if all this description is because they just didn't want to hire another voice actor. The yokai shivered. Whatever. Read it if you want to. Yeah. I kind of just don't care enough about the story to read it out loud. See, this is definitely going to be a problem with bad visual novels too. Is almost all visual novels should be dialogue and hopefully voiced dialogue, not descriptions. And anytime you have a description here, it is an admission that they couldn't animate things and show it visually, so they're doing a tell instead of show. There's no other way, there's no retreat, there's crossing of swords. He carves his words into his heart. Yep. He swings into a stance accompanied by a stout of resolve. The atmosphere shifts with rumble. The ground beneath him is now a battlefield once again, and no longer could anyone ridicule the man.
Awoken under the shroud of night, surrounded by the roar of battle. All else remains uncertain. I may have forgotten sins, but I cannot fall here. I shall regain my memory, and if any souls fell by my hand, I will offer you my neck.
Enough of this tedious chatter. Give us your neck now.
Swordsman swiftly swings his blade, driving into his opponent's abdomen, not bisecting the body, but folding it in half instead. The sword of his blade concludes by flinging his opponent far off into the horizon. It is in this moment that the yokai finally understand that this seemingly meek man before them is truly a powerful swordsman.
If words cannot sway you, then my blade will.
This really just feels like they are stealing the general Rurouni Kenshin Samurai X story of a masterless samurai who killed a bunch of people but doesn't want to kill and wants to be peaceful now. And in Rurouni Kenshin, he has a sword that is designed backwards, so the sharp part of the blade is actually on the outer edge, and the dull part of the blade is on the dull part is on the outer edge, and the sharp blade would be on the inner edge. And that means he can swing a sword to deflect other sharp swords and hit people with a blunt force instead of cutting them in half and killing them. But then in Rurouni Kenshin anime, he inevitably gets attacked by stronger and stronger bad guys, where he has to use the sword to actually cut people and kill people despite his own wishes. He gets drawn back into the fight. Not very different from this. Of course, the big difference between something like Rurouni Kenshin and this is Rurouni Kenshin came first. It was based on a manga. It went for a very long time. I think it was based on a manga, at least. Probably was. It went for season after season, movies, everything. Real big fandom. You've got maybe 9 more chapters to tell this same or similar story, and it's just not gonna really happen in any kind of effective or well-told story.
I'm sorry.
Rurouni Kenshin introduces several side characters, so in case you don't find the main character that interesting, you have some side characters to rest on. You can't add that many side characters into these stories because they very quickly will be forgotten about, and you just don't have time. Every sentence is precious. Every second, every scene is precious in this kind of event. And that's not particularly true for a standard visual novel. It's totally acceptable to take your time in a visual novel and give a 60, 80, 200 hour game in a visual novel. and have plenty of characters. But because this solo mode is just a side project, an underfunded, undercared about side project for a collectible card game, it's just never going to be given even a chance. So yeah, because this isn't voiced, I'm not really paying much attention to the dialogue at all. And we're left with like 3 different options as far as how this is going to end. Either he's going to get his memories back and realize that the other guy is just kind of a hallucination.
You are. Or perhaps you've lost something. Shall I lend a hand?
Yeah, I wasn't really expecting this guy to show up that quickly.
Why the long face? Surprised that we'd meet so soon? Do not think it a mere coincidence, Kagero. Just as you are seeking me, I have been seeking you.
So yeah.
As I thought, you know about me.
Sure I do.
He's either gonna become a fighter at the end, or become a pacifist at the end.
Innocent passersby.
And that's pretty much it. If there had been internal dialogue in the 2 previous chapters, this would have been potentially a lot more acceptable. But this really is unacceptable. Like, and I've just got to get myself through this and be done with Shadowverse. So I'm missing most of this dialogue. I'm not reading it. I'm trying to speed read it, and I would say if you're trying to read this, you may very well have to slow down this video to less than 1 time speed, half speed, quarter speed, just to read as it moves forward. But I don't want to add another 40 minutes or more as I try to read all of this out loud for a story I don't really care about, that isn't going to be written that well. There's just no hope of this being better. And I'd say overall in Shadowverse, I can't say I totally hated playing Shadowverse at the end, but I definitely found it overwhelming and irritating to play Shadowverse, because there's just so much daily quests and grinding.
What do I mean? Oh, you. Absolutely agitating.
Why must you speak through violence? I do not wish to fight.
You don't wish to fight? Even without memories, even without a clue about yourself, you continue to spout out the same nonsense!
Whatever do you mean? You and I...
Words are unnecessary. All we need is a clash of metal. Sword against sword. Forever the coward. Forever the fool.
At some level, you almost would expect that
but battle is inevitable.
The second personality here could be
soon a storm will follow.
Could just be the sword, or an evil spirit in the sword. Yeah, if you were gonna have to have this much internal dialogue instead of it saying it out loud, you probably needed to introduce a companion character to just say things out loud, even though that is a bit of a kind of anime trope of having some like side Krillin like character from Dragon Ball Z saying out loud what instead of having a narrator or just a description happen. But you really don't need that. He could have just say, you just phrase all of this better. Like, just stop with the telling instead of showing.
Are you still half asleep?
And you pretty much run into this issue already with these stories that they aren't that they're too long already, so adding descriptions doesn't help. If anything, what this feels like is that they I don't know if this is true, but it feels like they may just hire random people to write these stories, and some of the people that write them in one way where other people write them differently.
How inelegant. I can't stand looking at you.
I imagine being a work-for-hire writer for a visual novel inside of a collectible card game pays very little, and being a writer in Japan probably pays very little in the first place. In fact, being a writer anywhere probably pays.
Got them back soon after making a few corpses, though.
So there may be a lot of people who want to be writers in Japan, and
you're as good as guilty. There's no question.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Shadowverse is using
Depends on who you ask, doesn't it?
very new talent and to underpay them to write these kind of mediocre stories.
This is pointless.
Meanwhile, there are online communities of people writing stories and
What am I? What a
that
stale
at
question.
least have a little bit more experience and a little bit better refined ideas,
but this has been far more boring.
or at
than I
least
had hoped.
ridiculous ideas that are
I'd get
a
no
bit fresher.
satisfaction from killing you as you are now. So go and get your memories.
I do not know how.
No problem. I have the perfect medicine for shaking you out of your pathetic days. It shattered your body and your will once before. Now perhaps it can restore some motivation in you.
And it seems like we're finally getting back.
Survive and come find me. For my sword art is your purpose, your goal, and
Taking
your
forever to
gravestone.
get through this chapter.
Art of decay.
Interesting heart beating sound.
Fool.
What you would have done if you needed this much description is you would have
What a
had
waste of time.
the narrator narrate all of that.
Twice I have shown you this technique, but for as long as you remain the way you are, it doesn't matter if it's the 100th time, you will not prevail. Such a shame. Here I thought we might finally duel to the death.
And see, it would be funny if now
I
you
can
start to
only wait
follow
so long.
Suki
Next
Kage.
time, you'd better make sure those abilities blossom.
There are definitely a lot of kind of bad stories that get turned into animes. I'm isekai'd, sent to a different world, and all I have is my cell phone, or I'm isekai'd, sent to a different world, and all I have is my knowledge of playing RPG games. And all of those do come from the same community of one person just kind of taking somebody's concept to the next level and making it even more ridiculous. But there's a reason why those got made into animes too. Like, the idea of being in a fantasy world with a cell phone is something new, whereas we see basically nothing new in this story. If you told me that this visual novel was made in 1985, I'd believe you. Like, there's nothing new here. This is stuff that a story you could have told in 85 as far as creativity and quality. I would say there is a certain level of quality in some of the stories that get turned into anime that get them far enough.
No, I will not.
And that's just really an example of just slightly better bad quality writing. When you start to get to something like Fruits Baskets is kind of an interesting example where it's a family cursed to turn into the zodiac creatures if they touch someone of the opposite sex. And it's this emotional romance story between one girl and about a dozen family members, cousins. Like, that's an interesting setup for what is really just a generic drama romance story. Of course, that's not the archetype I would say you should use for this story. What you really would have wanted to do is something more along the lines of Power Rangers, Sailor Moon, things like that, where it's just a monster of the week. They could have easily established that the main leaders of these single player stories just become heroes, and they're just chasing after monsters being sent by Nexus or Narva, and that's about it. Instead of every couple chapters re-establishing new characters as if you're going to get it right this time and establish more interesting characters, which they aren't doing, and they can't do, because we know we're going back to the original 8 characters.
It shattered your body and your will once before. Now perhaps it can restore some motivation in you. Survive and come find me. For my sword art is your purpose, your
Undoubtedly,
and your gravestone.
if it was just the case that once every year they put out an anniversary solo story that involved all of the main characters, and that was it. Like, it wasn't a whole gameplay mechanic, it was just this solo thing. There's one I've seen that actually made a whole 30-minute anime episode to kind of start things up, and has like a couple of comic books, and that wouldn't be too crazy for every year to put out a standalone comic book style story that is much shorter instead of a whole visual novel length of story.
Why?
But
Tsukikage.
this is kind of funny. At a certain level, I guess there is a percentage of people, of which now I am including myself, that would not be willing to read any of this. And most people would just skip at this point if they've made that decision.
I can smell it. It
But
must be you.
We'll make you pay.
they certainly aren't accommodating people who want to know the story but don't want to end up having to read the whole thing. This is kind of a great example of, once again, reminding me not to play visual novels. Like, I'm really unlikely to play more than 5 to 10 in the next 10 years.
Let me start again. Have you seen a man carrying a sword like mine?
What are you talking about? Surely if anyone knows anything about those incidents, it'd be you.
He did the same to me. I stood no chance against him. You all must avoid him at all cost. Only death awaits those who encounter him. I wish for you to convey this to as many people as possible.
What are you talking about? Who cares? Let's shut him up.
So he keeps saying it's
Sorry, we don't have any time for nonsense.
the other guy,
This isn't a game, you know.
and they don't believe him,
You
or
killed our clan members. We want vengeance.
or they actively saw that it was him. We do get this single art, which is odd because I don't think we got that
No choice.
single art
For I
piece.
must hurry on. More lives are slain as we speak.
And basically, you could have made this character into a card character easily and written a short paragraph of his backstory
The righteous path. Let us battle.
without trying to tell 9 chapters around it.
Please stand down. And I ask you,
And all
spread
this
message. Avoid the man carrying a sword.
all this story
Shut your mouth.
really is being stretched out even more so they have more battles.
You kill all without discrimination. Because of you, everyone's pissed off.
So, you enjoy killing, is that it? You won't last long here in Velsar.
There is a weirdness in that each of the main characters,
The murders of your kind.
well, the Dragon Newt is a Dragon Newt even though he looks different, but the Ninetales is really a unique entity, and this guy is a unique entity from the looks of it. I guess you have to make a decision as to whether you think he's maybe a ghost or a spirit that inhabits the sword, or whether he's a human.
Grace, sir.
I apologize.
I feel like
Sure,
Greets may play a big role at the
Enough.
end anyways,
Off with you.
but he'll probably
Yes, sir.
be defeated before the final boss fight.
You didn't chase after them.
Thank you. I did not want to hurt them.
You struck to kill, while my claws are still numb.
There was no other choice I could have taken.
So I overheard what you had to say, and you claim that you weren't involved in the incidents.
That is true.
It's
We're getting
hard to
to
believe
slightly
when you
more
were the
voice
only
acting
one around
finally.
these parts, with that strange attire and sword.
Precisely why I had no other choice but to draw my sword. I understand it may be illogical. However, it is the truth.
It's much more
Yes.
tolerable when you just have two
Doesn't seem
people
like you're lying.
just talking back
You
and
don't believe
forth.
me?
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. You do reek of blood, you know. That's how we all tracked you down. We followed the stench.
We've got you now, you indiscriminate killer! How dare you murder our kin for no good reason?
I don't know why they would even pretend
as
like
you are
there's any
seeking me,
law and order,
I have been seeking you.
or the indiscriminate
I
killing
can
isn't just
smell it.
a
must
standard
be
part
you.
of this world.
But as long as there is no solid proof, I can't pass judgment on you. That wouldn't be justice. Innocent until proven guilty, as they say.
This is kind of a
You have my
great point
gratitude.
where if they, instead of
pardon
having
me.
alternate worlds,
It appears you are well trusted about
if they mostly stayed
tell
on
the
one
details.
giant planet,
About
it would
what?
make a lot of sense for this guy to
About the
be just
murders,
from like
techniques used,
Japan,
or the intention.
and this guy and everybody else
I've
in
seen the
Velsar
bodies.
being
It
their
was a
own
gruesome
island of monsters.
horizontal lines carved into their back and chest. And that's not all. I even saw bodies missing their arm.
Their arm.
Indeed. Left or right, but always one arm.
So maybe somebody
The
is
bodies were cut while they
stealing
were still
body
alive,
parts.
from both the front and behind. It had to have used magic. There's no other explanation. Oh, and there's one more thing. It isn't directly related to the bodies, and I can't say that I really understand it.
Yeah, it feels like you should have just started with this conversation.
The corpses were stretched out on flagstone. The stones nearest them had strange markings etched into them. Not sure if the information will prove useful to you, but there it is.
Thank you. That may have provided me some clues.
No need to thank me. I still haven't cleared you from all suspicion. Take care of it before the day's through. And if you fail to do this, it doesn't matter if you're telling the truth or not. I will crush you.
I understand. I promise you.
Good. And what do you intend to do about him? About this Tsukikage?
What to do? What to do?
That isn't a very good answer. Oh well. Just do what you have to do.
It would make more sense if the fortune teller could change your appearance and sometimes would show up as other characters to manipulate things. But then we're just back to no voice acting.
Good. And what do you intend to do about him?
As much as it may be annoying in an anime trope to have characters talking to themselves, it sure makes a lot more sense compared to this. And certainly you can have people just put it in parentheses and have the voice actor voice the lines in the head instead of it just being totally silent. It's not like the music is good enough or the background sound effect is good enough to justify utter silence like this.
I get it now. I want to stop Tsukikage.
Yeah, a lot of this internal dialogue just stretching for time for no reason. It's already been 47 minutes. I know we took a few minutes extra at the beginning here to talk about the new content, but oh boy, is this rough.
A blade is like water, not good warm. It must
I'd
be
almost certainly
cold.
say no to any new single player story element in a collectible card game or any other game if it proved to be as bad as this.
Shall we chat a little about us?
And I knew it was going to be long, at least. There was at least 4 or 5 chapters when I first started playing Shadowverse.
A demonic sword which is killed and bathed in the blood of many. Through time, generation after generation, consciousness of its own emerged.
There is also the video game Soul Calibur, where there is a demonic sword and there's a I think a good sword too in Soul Calibur, depending on who wins the Soul Calibur tournament.
By the water that smothers those desires. To kill.
The idea is kind of rare, but it's not totally insane.
Mired in violence, an age of war. Today,
to say that some swords have become demonic.
Open warfare is a thing of the past. The past. Things were great back then. I cut and stabbed, and not a complaint in the world. Except this fool.
Maybe these characters are just from the past, but it would have to be a recent past, not the cowboy times, I think.
We must not murder. We must not take lives. How foolish. A pathetic joke. I am a blade. To cut and kill is my purpose. We argued and fought, time and time again. Sometimes he wins, other times I win.
I would be very surprised if it turned out that this was actually just 2 people instead of
the
2
days
spirits
were
and
I won
swords, or
were undeniably
1
the
spirit and a
best.
sword.
I can remember them so well.
We're once again getting just like no background image.
Please stop!
I believe you are mistaken. This isn't something that can be halted. I cut the werewolf down as he fled.
Yep.
I'm begging you. I have a family.
So
You
he's
do now.
killing werewolves,
Don't worry. I'll find them next and bring you all together in the end.
dragon newts.
I killed the dragon newt as he begged.
See, and if you're gonna have a flashback, you might as well just have a
You're an
background.
yokai, aren't you? How can you betray us like this?
Whoever said we were allies? At least I never did.
So he is technically, I think, a
And I
yokai,
turned my back on the yokai. It felt so liberating.
which that would make sense.
But the days where Kagero won were a true low point. Utterly depressing.
Although I don't know if
Being defeated was
Oni
depressing.
demons technically are
Being cut
yokai
down was
in the first
depressing.
place. Like
Worst of all,
yokai, to
though,
my understanding, was
being
always
sheathed with no purpose.
items that had a spirit
Completely devoid of
embedded
joy and
into
pleasure.
it. Items that kind of came to
Kagero,
life.
Why are you
Uh,
always
so in this case, it would
composed,
be a
so
sword that
calm?
came to life.
It is abnormal. It is unusual.
Although I think there's a certain level of a item must be faithfully used for like 100 years before it gets its spirit embedded into it, not just a sword in general.
Of times, I simulated our battle, and then it bloomed on me. The flowers of death. Within
This
the
definitely
darkness,
feels like
there it was.
this is
A
where
beautiful path of blood-red licorice.
the new content would have stopped for a while, and then it would have probably been a couple of
That will
months
reveal a way to
until they
kill them.
added the back half of
In
the
short, I
chapters.
experienced an
This would be the
enlightenment,
to be
and
continued
that was
element.
how the art of decay was born.
It's way better though,
An instantaneous two-strike
It's
technique.
fully
For as long as he
voiced
thinks that is all it
with a little
is,
bit of
he'll
music
never
playing in the
prevail.
background, although it is the same
The
repetitive
technique exists
music
to
we've
take
been
down
listening to
Kagero.
for
It is also
since the
proof
beginning.
that I'm the one and only. In our next battle, I unleashed the technique with all my might.
Inevitably,
hatred,
I
and
also
intention to kill.
am not that good at being a critic of
Every
visual
bit of my
novels.
energy was
I have to
focused
admit
on
that too.
striking
As
him down.
bad as I think this is,
And I must
some
say,
of that, some small
enjoyed
percentage
myself.
of me thinking this
For the
bad is
first
also
time
me
ever,
just not
he
being
lost his composure.
particularly good about
I could feel the intent to
understanding
kill
where the
and
scale
taste the
is between
desperation
good
in him.
visual novels and
I've
bad
never
visual
seen anything
novels,
like it.
because
It
there's
was completely
probably
outside my expectations.
like millions of
I
really
was going to
terrible
snatch
visual
his
novels
life,
out there,
and he was
which would
going
put
to
this
snatch mine.
closer to a 5 out of
end,
10
We
instead
both
of a
fell.
potentially 2 or
I've had
3 out of
wins,
10.
and I've had losses, but this was the
But I
first
also
fair
don't really
draw.
want to become an expert
And
at
then,
reviewing
you see,
visual novels either.
Something fantastic
I want to
occurred.
dip my toe in and play the best of the best and just say, hey, this is what a generalist gamer
Have I
should
changed
check
my
out.
own
Because
form?
clearly Western players,
What
people
bliss.
outside of Japan,
Now
should
we
play
can truly
2 or
kill
3
each
visual
other
novels
once and for
in
all.
their life.
Or
uh,
so I
but they
thought.
don't need to or
A
have
part
to
of it is
go
my fault.
down the
But he
well
lost his
and play
memories.
hundreds and
He's
thousands of
lost himself.
visual novels.
I would feel no joy in cutting him down at this moment. I wish to kill him even if there isn't a point.
Visual novels
but I can wait
almost
a little for
certainly
the fruit
came
to
from
ripen.
a point where
You're an impediment, a
video
hindrance.
games on
I'm myself.
PC and
A
on
single blade
consoles
is what I am. That's how it should be.
were
And here, a
limited by the
suitable battlefield
hardware,
for a duel.
limited by the
A blade is
space.
like water.
so having a lot of
Flows cold
text and
and
very little
feeds the
visuals
flowers of blood.
makes sense
You who would
to
reject
give
that
as
do
much
not deserve to
gameplay
be a
content
sword.
as you can for
So
the
be
smallest amount
gone.
of
Disappear.
megabytes you could
I'll
use,
erase you.
like potentially
My
just
long-sought
one
wish will
megabyte
finally
floppy
be
disk drive.
realized. You have no
But when
idea
you start to
how
get into the
long I've been
era
waiting for this
of
day.
making
Kagero,
video games
I will
on
kill you.
CD-ROM and DVD and Blu-ray, or just downloading where you can take as much space as you want, we are really not in an era that is particularly hospitable to the idea of living within those boundaries of a few megabytes. And now it really is more of a case of most people that make visual novels. The vast majority of visual novels that come out day to day are done because the creators of the visual novels are being lazy or just don't have skill in making an interactive experience. Which there is kind of a wide gap between a visual novel's level of interactivity and almost any other video game's level of interactivity. There are some games, certainly, puzzle games, word games, that have a smaller amount of activity compared to a open world first person shooter RPG game that lets you control and move a character.
You're that savage they're talking about.
And at a certain level, the storyline and dialogue that could have been honed in a visual novel's creator's abilities. Story and dialogue are elements that are often sorely lacking in your standard military first-person shooter. We're back to just descriptions.
I want to take his head off his neck and prove that I'm the real one.
But, like...
What the hell are you talking about?
A trail of corpses. That is how he'll know my location.
I wonder if this
is the scent of blood.
Is the same people in the same scene? I don't think it is.
He won't act unless circumstances demand it, like stopping someone from being killed. That kind of nonsense. He needs to be backed into a corner.
So
that
yeah,
there's no place to escape but the battlefield.
There's definitely a middle ground where somebody that really has a story to tell should be working with somebody that has the ability to make more of an interactive experience. And I don't know how you specifically would do that with a collectible card game. I think what you probably would want to do is definitely integrate the cards in some way. Like a different way, I've suggested other ways in the previous episodes, but a different way is you could just have the equivalent of the card game War, where these characters have different attacks and defenses. So if you just showed the cards without showing the attacks and defenses, and you were just flipping and trying to pick which is the highest attack each time, or which is the highest defense, or who would win in this battle, that would be interesting. Like over here, if there's just like, you take some of this space here, you put a picture of one card, and then you click on the card as the story is playing. Do you really need that kind of distraction? No, but because that just would get in the way of reading. And that kind of highlights the problem, is that you do.
What could this be?
If you really are going to read this, you need to focus and read on this. So I don't know how you had interactivity to a section like this. Probably what you do is what most people would do, is that you would have a cutscene, and then you'd have some more card playing, and then you'd have a cutscene and more card playing. But that gets in the way too.
You there? What are you doing?
So now we have,
I almost forgot,
the guy that changes the timelines.
All alone and forlorn.
The vampire.
Oh, 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 Oh,
Your name is... What was it again?
Have we met before? Oddly, not a single scratch on you if we did. But no matter.
What would be interesting here is if this guy just gets killed. Like,
My. So there
that
are
would
still
be
some
an
embers
interesting
burning in
twist.
you.
If you had
Exactly what I had hoped.
2 or 3 people
No matter how
chasing
many
after
times the
their
cycle
enemies,
repeats,
and
you do not change
unbeknownst to them, their enemies have been
course,
killed
I
and
am
defeated
and can only
by
be
a
myself.
vampire character like this. It doesn't
I
have to be a
approve.
vampire character, but by
What
some
a
strong character that they don't even
coincidence.
know
I do
about.
too. You're quite interesting, I must say. Allow me to
So
test you
people
out.
would be on this foolish journey for revenge that they can never have.
to try.
And then it would convert from a journey to revenge to a journey for some level of justice to defeat somebody who's even stronger and more evil.
Fantastic.
That's not what's happening here as a story,
This
but it would
marks the end.
it does it would be
And this
interesting if
concludes the
Tsukuyogi
fight.
was defeated and
Splendid.
just removed from the story.
You truly are a strange one. You are so very much weak.
I guess when this guy dies,
So why
the
then
timeline
do you
may
smell of
reset for
blood?
him.
Once the stain is set in, it cannot be removed.
We're still getting way too much description. Man, it's just so out of place. It just feels so odd to
you're
have
hiding your
no
true
description
strength.
text at
You have but
all
one life.
in
You
the
should give
2
more
previous
thought to how you
chapters.
use it. Now is not the time to be holding back.
I remember now. Your name is Kikage.
My, where did you hear that name?
We have battled to the death many times before. I had learned your name then.
It has to be a different writer. It just has to be.
Why, I have no memory of that.
As for what you are, I do not recall. Or perhaps I never knew.
We're an hour and 2 minutes into this. It's just so exhausting.
I myself. A single blade is what I am.
And see,
If you don't feel like fighting,
oddly,
for me,
this
that's
isn't
fine.
really scaring me away from doing this solo
I've
mode
taken a liking to
in
that
Yu-Gi-Oh!
second
Duel
floor, so I'm
Masters, the
feeling
game that I'm playing
generous.
now, because the solo mode
What's your name?
in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel
I'll put it on
Master
your
is just
gravestone.
so much shorter,
Charizard.
and you get this kind of
Lovely name it is. I'll make sure your death is just as exquisite.
the
Ah, right. Your blade.
My sword will guide you through the veil onto the
Like,
red floral path.
because when you're given
Behold,
guaranteed
Art of
just
decay.
3 or 4 sentences of storyline, that's very
magnificent.
reasonable. This is going much closer to 100 lines of content, of 100 lines of text, or
Beautiful.
maybe even several thousand
blossomed beautifully.
words.
I must
Which
say,
often that is how
you
visual
are
novels are
really
rated,
something.
is that
You were
you
the
need
first to meet gazes
to have
with me
a
before my stripes
5,000
landed.
words in it for people to care about, or 1,000
Fascinating.
words for people to care about it.
Truly fascinating.
Whereas a
I
Western
shall engrave
non-visual
your name
novel
here.
enthusiast like me, but
It was a pleasure. Now,
like
that
I would
fool
want
Kagero,
a
it is
relatively
about
small
time he
number of
reaches
words.
me with a strength
That
and
being said, if
resolve.
somebody told me they were selling the visual novel they were selling had 100 words in it, I would think, wow, that's incredibly too short. Alucard is just Alucard, which is Dracula backwards. They've just replaced Alucard from Castlevania series to Alizard
This
with a
is-
Z.
Tsukikage.
It seems like Alizard is just dead and removed from this story.
I'm
And
sorry
it seems
he did
like
this to you.
we're not even going to really get anything close to a good, happy ending for this character. This definitely feels like this is trying to feel like a visual novel with branching paths, but there are no real branching paths at all. And I have to tell you, as a content creator, I sit through this and it bores me, and I don't really want to come back to it. And so
carved into their back and chest.
I'm gonna probably have to
that's
take a
not
2
all.
or 3 hour break
saw bodies
before I
missing their
even
arm.
am willing to come back and do the
Their
next story. Whereas
Indeed.
ideally,
But always
I would
one arm.
It is
I
all
would
coming together.
play this chapter, take like a 20-minute break, come back, play the next chapter, take another 20-minute break, come back, play the next chapter after that, and that one would be particularly long, so that'd probably be it for the
I see
day.
secret
Then the
behind this
next day,
technique.
finish
Part of decay.
the other, finish the remaining chapter, and be done with it in 2 days. But really, I'm probably looking at 3 weeks to like 3 days to an entire week of just having to take massive breaks.
Alizard, it is thanks to you that I am now prepared. I will slay him without fail. May you rest in peace.
It is an interesting question as far as visual novels. Is there a way to get people back on board once you've lost them? I would say probably not. Whereas a TV show, if you have a bad episode on a TV show, but it's not so bad, I could see people being a little turned off on one episode, coming back to the next episode, it doing something fresh and different and new, and bringing people back into it. There is an anime that, what was it called? The Melancholy of Haru Suzuya, and it did a like season 2 called the Endless 8 arc, which was basically 8 episodes of the exact same story, the exact same animation, with only very minimal changes as they were repeating the same time loop over and over again. And that totally drove people crazy. And it really was only done because they were so far behind and so over budget that they couldn't possibly make a real season 2. I doubt very many people managed to make it to the end of the Melancholy of Haru Suzuya as a anime series or a manga because of that. Now, the Endless 8 arc did happen in the manga too, but I think it was done a lot shorter and made a lot more sense.
It exists to be snatched away.
That is a
Nothing else
concept
could
of
explain these fantastic
like
circumstances
8
around here.
8 different time loops that are almost exactly the same as a concept that really should be done in at most 2 episodes.
I've remembered a little about what you are. And
Anytime people try to just sprinkle in slight changes and make it feel like there's a lot more to mine is pretty bad, poor quality. there's a real world equivalent of it in which you can go to old mining locations where you panhandle for gold in the United States, but the amount of gold that you would actually find is pretty much zero, and so much so that they put actually small nuggets of gold in the parts that you panhandle just so you feel like you found something, so they hook you. But generally they charge you way more to panhandle for gold than they actually give you back.
A pity, though I'm probably the one that took them.
And that was pretty much the case even when back in the past when people were panhandling for gold, is that they were barely getting enough gold to live off of. Gold is a fairly large impure mineral, so it doesn't come in giant nuggets or streams.
What now?
If it ever did come in giant nuggets and streams, it has long since been mined out.
If utilized in the right way, it could save lives.
And I am totally checked out on this story.
Why did you fall to the dark side?
But yeah, this visual novel is not too different from sifting hundreds of pounds of dirt to find a small ounce nugget of gold.
Why did you fall to the dark side? I didn't fall. I am the dark side. Save lives? What a joke. An utterly laughable joke. You understand nothing. Nothing at all. Art of Decay severs lives, not saves them. The blade exists to split you and I apart.
I do not understand the meaning of your words.
Well, then I'll spell it out for you, Kagero. Listen closely. You are me.
What are you saying?
You still can't
Finally
figure
getting
it out?
some
How many times
resolve.
do I need to repeat myself? You are me.
That's precisely what I do not understand.
Wrong again, fool. You're just refusing to accept the truth. You and I were spirits who dwell in swords. Vengeful souls that have no form of our own. A single sword held us both. I inhabited the blade, and you the sheath.
So finally we get the explanation.
We were two souls sharing one body, but I don't need, nor do I want anyone else around.
Which, if they were going to go with that story, then they should have animated him without having a sheath in the first place. Assuming they are even animating these characters, which I guess these are probably original characters that are being animated.
And I hate it when you were the victor.
So, like, animate him so he doesn't have a sheath, and then you could say the man who never sheaths his sword as a description, or who just puts it on a belt through a loop.
This body, this face. I had to learn how to move and walk again. But the body you have is the original.
Lies! None of this can be true!
Your head is as rigid as your moves! A fool even amongst fools! Listen well. Why do you believe your sword cannot be used to kill? Because you're the sheath. Why does your body reek of blood? Because I've killed using that very same body.
So, apparently his sword cannot kill.
Are you so sure about that? Perhaps your mind is forgotten, but I bet your body can recall every last slice. Go ahead, recall that sensation. Remember how it felt. It's still there. I know it. in your palms, in your
There are
arms.
characters though
The
that
feel of
fight
slicing
just
into
with the
someone
sheath
and
of a sword
terminating
too,
their life.
so it would have made a lot of sense and maybe been a little too on the
cut
nose
werewolf
if
down as he
our
fled.
main character
I
only
killed
carried a
Dragon Eaters who
sheath
begged,
and thought he had lost
and I
his
turned
sword,
my back on the yokai.
thought that Tsukagi
But that
had
cannot
stolen
be.
his sword from
I-
him,
With these hands,
and
With
then the
those very hands,
entire journey could be, I've lost my memories.
you spilled an ocean
I must
of
get
blood.
get my sword back. It's being used unjustly. Instead of both of them having swords. And again, if this is an original animated character, then it would make some sense to animate this guy as holding the sheath like a sword. But there's a real problem when you have to get 7 chapters in to start to even begin to get interested, and there's only 9 chapters in total, and you have to be an hour and 16 minutes into the gameplay before you start to see something slightly interesting. Like, the setup is just pointless. It's unnecessary, it's not adding anything. And then we once again are just back to no voice acting at all. It just doesn't work. I really don't hope we don't run into any more of this. There is a decent chance with the other chapters that it would be fully voice acted, but there is also a possibility that it isn't.
I have killed with these hands.
With those very hands. Now do you finally understand? We are the same, you and I. We're both brutal,
Shadowverse still has the
indiscriminate
problem of
killers.
making these original characters
But being
that
the same is so
have
very boring.
way too
Loathsome,
much
in
as far
fact.
as belts and high anime fashion costume
Does
design
this pain you
for
to
them.
realize? Does
Like,
it make you feel bitter?
these elements don't
But the
really
pain you
implied
feel
enough
is
or mean
nothing compared
enough,
to my hatred towards you.
like,
Do you know
for
how
their own worth. It
agitating
would just
was
be easier
not being able to control my own body.
to have
Even more
less
detestable was
details,
that our skills were
and then
split
you could
even.
have your
That's why we
animators
traded victories.
make different
When
poses
I
and
won,
different
I got control of the body. When you won, the opposite was true.
different
50-50,
like
as even as could
animations even.
be. That's why I had to develop that technique. With it,
Instead of
I
putting
can
all of your eggs
finally
in
be
one
rid of you and do as
basket
I please.
and just animating one
Art of
one
decay. It is what
image
sets you and
of
I apart.
each
It is the
character,
key to my
and
victory.
then having to reuse
It
it
is the
over and over
technique
again,
that will
and then having to
extinguish
shake
your life.
that single image back and
Once
forth,
you're
or
dead,
have
you
it
can truly be
pretend like
free.
it's dropping to its knees, but really just panning the whole standing image
Prepare yourself,
downward.
Kagero. I'm going to end you.
You can even see that in kind of a generic way, in that they are animating 5 fingers, whereas a lot of animations in the old days would only animate 3 fingers, because that would just save them time. At least that's what Disney did in the West. Now, you can't really do that in Japan because
I remember now.
there's
The sensation of the people I
potentially
killed. I killed people
the
that
feeling
fled.
that they might be
People that
Yakuza,
begged.
since the
People who
Yakuza
called
sometimes
me a
cut
friend.
off their fingers and pinkies.
Lives were lost by these hands. No one was left
Although,
alive. It fills
so
me with
they
such sorrow.
don't.
Are you going to start
I think
crying?
particularly older Japanese people would not
Skikage.
appreciate a
Or
character
you intend on
missing
doing once
fingers.
you have killed me.
Is it not obvious? The same as now. Kill and then kill some more. Eventually, the world will change.
Although I will say,
Each and every
even
soul will glare
even
and
now,
tear
if
at one
Disney
another
came out with a brand new
and
cartoon
bring back
and a
the
character
exciting
had 3
age of
fingers
warfare
or
and
4 fingers
bloodshed.
instead of 5, I think people would
I see.
just see that as being far
If
too
so,
lazy.
I have no time for tears. You shall not be the cause of any more suffering.
And what is that supposed to mean?
It means exactly what it sounds like. This is a conflict between you and I. No one else needs to be involved. Being hurt by you, hurting you, they are my burden to bear. The sorrow, the misery.
More than likely,
I
it
will
feels
not let
like
anyone else undergo these
Kagero
feelings.
is going to have to kill
What I
himself
do with anyone else doesn't concern
to
you.
end this story.
It certainly
Or-
does. Even the fact that I have reached
Like,
you
these are
without the results of
spirits
my
in the
power
sword,
alone.
and there's really
You've
no
came so far by
backstory
killing people,
as far
severing
as how you
ties, but
defeat
I've
or
gone this
stop
far
a
through
spirit.
connecting with people.
Like,
Tsukioke, let's end
what I
this.
would expect to see is
No
like
matter.
a
I
Shintoist
was waiting for you to show me
Buddhist,
some fire
like,
in your eyes.
flag
I
seal
didn't hone my skills so that I
sealing
can
the
kill
sword
you at your
around it,
weakest. I
wrapping
want
it
to
with like
best you at your
magic
strongest in a
Shintoist
fair
Buddhist
match.
spells.
Back when we were still
That'd be about the
one,
only
a
way you
defeat
could
simply meant a
seal
short
a sword.
sleep. But this time is different. You won't wake
The
up from this one.
only other thing I could expect to see here, and I would
forever
suspect that
disappear
is
from my
how this
sight,
is going to go,
Kagero.
is he's going to have to break his
Tsukikage,
sword,
my
and
other half.
break the other guy's sword.
We are one. Hence why I must stop you.
You disgust me. A mere sheath is
And I
no
don't know
sword. A sword
how this
never
really is
unsheathed
going to
but a
feel
stick.
like a good
A
ending, if
drawn
that's what we're
sword,
expecting.
cold steel, neither good nor evil.
This may very well
For
just
your
be a bad
duty
ending,
forgotten.
which is
And
fine.
the path
We
you
needed
walk
to
has gone
see
astray.
at least one bad ending for each of these
You must fall.
fated, ill-fated characters. And it just ends on darkness for another card battle. We really didn't make any progress at all as far as the fortune teller or as far as the story that is overall happening here.
You lack elegance.
Yep, it definitely feels like this is just by mandate. They needed another character and they needed another chapter. I seriously doubt that this guy is going to be the one that is super needed in the final battle. I think that the Nine-Tails Fox with actual magic would be a lot more useful, and the vampire guy will be more useful, and the dragon newt with the
I must stop you.
magical stone would probably be more useful. And once again, we're just back to descriptions. I wouldn't be surprised if the story ends with them just forever locked in an eternal battle, which
Loathsome.
would make a lot of sense for a metaphorical
That's what
tale.
makes the hunt all the more thrilling. Now, the end is nigh, Kagero. Your time in this world ends here.
I don't think a Japanese story would really make this point, or anybody has made this point, but at a certain level, all swords have the enemy of time and rest. Like, real world swords need to be oiled, maintained, and cared for by a sword master, and time will still rot the handles and rust the blades. Nothing is forever. So
My
if these
sword will guide you
swords
through the veil to
spirits
the red floral path.
have nobody
Behold.
holding the sword, then without some kind of magical protection, they would
Art of decay.
rust or decay, which I'm doing the in the dark recesses, the key is not in the swordsmanship per se, but rather the steps, the footwork. That is where the true nature of the art of decay lies. Tsukikage could see it, a path of blood-red lyrics, and this is just pitch black background. Flowers are of course just visions. Tsukaki honed senses of killing visualizes them as signals, as beckoning. This moves way too fast for me to read. Make blooms of flowers of blood. It is an inescapable technique. The first kick off the ground is so quick, so powerful, a numbing shock wave paralyzes the target. A preemptive strike with the speed imperceptible to eyes. And they just could not animate any of this at all, so it's just black. Unseen by the immobilized target. That is the art of decay, born of dark malice. I'm probably making this harder for people to read at this point. In the very moment he kicked off the ground, he was not the only figure that disappeared from sight. The two of them disappeared simultaneously. They moved so quickly that everything, even the light of the moon and the shadows themselves, lost track of them. Only a swish of the sword slicing through the air could be heard. An instant later, this is one of those examples where the fight is supposed to happen in an instant, but they have to basically describe it for several minutes.
This can't be.
How?
Well, they don't really have to describe it.
You said it yourself, that we are one and the same. Twice I have experienced the technique. There is nothing you can master that I cannot. In addition, they say that dead men tell no tales, but the corpse of one man told me everything I needed to know. The key to your technique is the movement.
Connecting with people, huh?
So the corpse of Elazard helped him somehow?
Art of decay simultaneously strikes the front and back of your opponent. However, the secret to this technique is not magic, but of exceptional swordplay and footwork.
Yeah, this is just exactly what it said before, now being voiced.
At an angle, and then
Just
rotate your
repeating.
body with the
It's
toes of your
ridiculous.
extended foot as an axis. You make one strike there to the front, and then another strike to the back as you rotate out. By making two strikes from the side before the victim notices, you can simultaneously cut their abdomen and back in one move. After I puzzled out your secrets, all I needed was to do the same. It is this very body in which you had honed your skills. Meaning, the movements of it are embedded into these muscles, carved into these bones.
I shouldn't be surprised. This is your specialty after all. Even when backed into a corner facing certain doom, you still managed to see what you needed to know.
So the question I suppose I'm wondering here is Tsukikage going to disappear, or disappear and leave the blade, or is he just gonna die and his body still be there and the blade still be there? Like, are we gonna end up seeing our main character holding two blades?
How frightening. How detestable. You've always been that way, for ages upon ages.
Yeah, I don't even know how you would make this any rougher. This is really, really bad. I guess you could try to make this kid friendly. The whole Shadowverse kid-friendly anime probably would be totally out of my wheelhouse as far as interesting me. And that would be awful. Certainly if they just started telling the anime story.
Trace the same steps.
There was never a point at which I wanted to actually watch the Shadowverse anime, or thought for a second it would actually be of any interest to me.
Master it myself.
Maybe if the Shadowverse anime went for several seasons, it might eventually evolve into something. But I wouldn't imagine too much, because it's not like the Pokemon anime series has really gone anywhere after probably 30 seasons or more. And it's not like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series went anywhere, despite there being a bunch of random spin-offs and other series in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series.
Rydo, didn't you? You sheathed and redrew your blade with your slash.
It's still talking. Still just writing text.
I can't believe you did it.
I almost wonder
At the last possible moment,
if maybe there was
your pathetic
an overall
passive nature, an
package
original strike of your own.
where amongst the 4 chapters or sub-chapters inside the chapter, there needed to be a specific amount of words or sentences, and instead of trying to spread that out, they just crammed a ton of extra words, extra text into this one subchapter to make over to build up the overall number.
I shall swear an oath. From here,
it is also very possible that this may be some kind of very traditional Japanese storytelling method that I'm just not particularly familiar with, as if this is like maybe more inspired by something like Kabuki theater or something like that, like one of the like Japanese storytelling methods. There was a lot of tradition there, certainly, as far as using puppets to tell a story, having theaters, having street plays, whereas I think being able to read and have newspapers take that over, and books take that over. He did just disappear. Happened a lot earlier in the Western world, whereas the Japanese and their isolationism in their ancient times, I think, left them gave them a lot more time to embrace and build upon more traditional street plays and theater style of telling stories. And in general, just there was probably, for a longer amount of time, relatively speaking, more people that could not read, or could read very little, so the idea of printing paper and books wouldn't make sense. While there are plenty of mangas and light novels that certainly exist nowadays in Japan, take note that there aren't that many novel-length novels, like really, really long books, that make it outside of Japan. There's a couple, certainly, that should make it outside of Japan, but tend not to even be translated. But most things, manga in particular, very little writing compared to the animation, much more of a pictorial focus, and short novels as a genre basically don't even really exist that much, or definitely not given much legitimacy in the Western world. This is just going to be same thing over and over
The
again.
ending of our newest tale is as of yet unwritten. The cycle repeats again and again. Claws and fangs break and shatter before fading into darkness.
And the only thing you can really do with this is just sigh with relief that it's voiced and try and see if the story we've just been told really connects with the end caps of the beginning and the end.
It can't be helped. The curtains of fate have already
And
fallen
see, that
on this stage.
narrator voice is different than the
Pride.
fortune tellers.
Peace. Resolve. Resignation. None of it matters in the end. This play was written to be a tragedy from the start. What a pity. It breaks my heart.
See, even they call it a play.
Just kidding. I left my heart behind forever ago. Anyhow, the cycles continue until fate leads them to the ultimate conclusion. Isn't that right, Nexus?
This is the kind of reveal you really would have wanted to introduce
Why do you seek endless cycles
at the next main chapter instead of having the surprise repeated 4 times.
Thou art but a broken vessel, destined
You
to
could have
succumb.
ended, isn't that right, ... to be continued.
There's no need to get bent out of shape. Why, I am doing all this just for you. Keeper, Nexus. Just for you. Do remember that this world is under my control. No one can meddle in it.
There is
unless
some
I say
weirdness
so.
that
Vessel of stagnation, know thy fate is destruction.
like these vessels that seem
I
to no
am a
longer
keeper.
have the keepers
I am
inside of
nexus
them,
of serenity.
like the Portalcraft
Bringeth
main
harmony
character.
unto worlds.
They seem to always get way more magical power than they should be ever allowed to get. The keepers are effectively
It's
creating
very
their own
lovely if I
enemies.
do say so myself. But a tad too much, and things will lose their interest. Well then, it's time for me to slumber once again. Next, we'll revisit that nostalgic place. Perhaps this time, the bullet of fate will hit its mark.
It almost makes it seem like she's going through the previous chapters multiple times. Almost to a level where you could remove from the timeline everything that's happening here as far as Entropy's Abyss is concerned. Yeah. Yeah, it does kind of feel like Fate's Trigger conclusion will get rewritten, so Entropy's Edition and Entropy's Abyss and Entropy's Abyss Reconclusion wraps up and undoes itself, and then we move ourselves to the final loop, and that is where I was hoping to end, and we'll just have to play this off screen and see how this goes. But yeah, it's not really helpful for me to say that was awful one more time, but I'll do it anyways. That was really, really bad. I would say at least 2 or 3 times worse than the 2 previous subchapters of Entropy's Abyss. Good news is, theoretically, there's 1 subchapter here, there's 1 whole chapter here, which will be a little bit longer, and 1 whole chapter here, I believe. And I suppose there is certainly a danger that this might get back to subchapters. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.